Um, as most of you know, I'm Jane Bosler, and I welcome you on behalf of the Community Senior Center. It's nice to see you all here. Traveled to Colorado with Kent. Thank you, Kent. Drotar, is that how you pronounce your name?
Yes, Drotar, yep.
Drotar. Kent Drotar, welcome. Good to see you here in Vermont. And you can get started.
All righty. So what we'll do, normally it works best if we hold off I'll be glad to take plenty of questions and answers at the end, but it usually works better if we just hold off on questions until the very end. So I'll go ahead and get started. I'm the Director of Public Relations at the Wild Animal Sanctuary. Our main facility is located about 30 to 35 miles northeast of Denver, Colorado. So I'm in touch with you today from more than halfway across the country, and it's a pleasure to be here. I was not too surprised when Jane got in touch with me. Since we started doing these Zoom meetings, with COVID and everything, I've had a lot more people from farther away reach out to ask about them. Normally when I give presentations like this, I go in person. It might be to a civic organization like a Rotary Club, Kiwanis Club, Optimists, or school groups. And they're all within, the Denver metro area, or at least not too far away here in Colorado. But this platform, I know a lot of people, it's a whole lot less than being in person. I mean, there's no doubt about it. But in a way, it's also opened up the avenues or the channels to allow people to see a presentation that maybe they wouldn't normally see, because obviously I wouldn't be traveling to Vermont to your folks' home to give this presentation. So in a way, this is actually improving our communications and the exposure that we get. So we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to have to see if I can share the screen. See, hopefully I have that. I want to go to, let's see. Let me check here. Yeah, so let me see if this is going to show up. All righty. So are you seeing a screen with some tigers on it?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, and make sure I might ask for a thumbs up. We have a couple of videos in here, and I'm not as familiar with Google Meet as I am Zoom. So hopefully when I turn on the videos, the sound will come through. So Jane, when we do the videos, I'll just be looking for a thumbs up that you can hear me. And if not, I'm gonna have to do some troubleshooting.
Okay.
So we'll go ahead and get going here. So got some.
I don't see tigers. I only see the original shot of you, Kent.
There must be a setting up in the corner that you kind of select what you're viewing. There might be.
Janet, you just have
to see where people is. It says show everyone.
Janet,
everyone else.
If you do your cursor up to his face, you will see a pin. Unpin it.
Yeah.
Hit the pin again.
Okay. Thank you, Jean. Okay.
Good job, Jean.
Yes.
It's happening to us all the time. We forget.
Yeah, we know where we're stuck. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and get going here. And sometimes it helps to mute your microphone just because, if the dog barks or the phone rings or something like that, or you have a little coughing fit, but that's up to you. So you see 5 tigers, 5 gorgeous tigers. The one on the right there, second to the right, actually, and I don't know if this gives me an option to kind of use a little pointer. Zoom does. Let me see here. Change full screen captions. Nope, because I was looking for a pointer. But anyway, over here on the screen, there's a tiger, the second from the right. Her name is Mary Jane, and she was actually rescued from a truck stop in El Paso, Texas.
Oh my goodness.
And she was in a small chain link cage out by the diesel pumps. So when the big semis rolled in, they could, pump the fuel that they needed, but there was a tiger there. And they actually advertised her so that people would be more inclined to come to that particular truck stop so they could see the tiger. But they also bred her extensively so that you could go inside the truck stop and buy a tiger cub. So that's one particular story. If you go all the way to the left, there's a tiger over there. Her name is Sierra. Sierra was rescued when a gang leader in Chicago was arrested. And then the other 3, they came from a place, ironically, called tiger rescue in Colton, California back in the early 2000s. It's about year 2003. The place was anything but a rescue facility. It turned out to be kind of a killing field for big cats, which is why the USDA stepped in and removed the animals. When they went in there, they actually found 58 dead tiger cubs, a number of animal carcasses on the property. And we were able to get 13 tigers and about 5 leopards out of there. So what we're talking about today are, let me advance the slide here. We're talking about captive-born large carnivores. So all of these animals have all been born in captivity. And I'll tell you about some numbers that we have here, but none of them have lived in the wild. So we're rescuing animals from places where it's illegal to keep them or the animals are being abused or neglected. So as we go on today, I'll tell you a little bit more about our mission, talk to you about our sanctuary and refuge, the facilities that we have under the Wild Animal Sanctuary, the problem, how did this become such a problem, a little bit about rescues and how people can be more engaged with our work. So let's go ahead and get going. So our mission here at the Wild Animal Sanctuary, and we're the largest, oldest sanctuary in the world dedicated to rescuing large carnivores. Here in this month of January of 2021, we're celebrating our 41st anniversary. Our founder and executive director started rescuing these animals as a 19-year-old college student, first year in college, way back in 1980. So our mission is to rescue animals, and we specialize in captive-born large carnivores. So obviously there's lots of different animals that could be rescued from illegal or abusive situations. And then we rehabilitate them. We get them healthy again so they can live freely in large acreage habitats. And at the same time, what we like to do, and what I'm doing hopefully today, is educating people about what's called the captive wildlife crisis, not just in the US, but around the world. So how big of a problem is this? They estimate there's 20 to 25,000 large carnivore type animals outside of the zoo system just in the US. For example, in Texas, there are over 4,000 tigers held by individuals. And that's more tigers than there are in the wild. In the wild, there's only about 35 to 3,800 tigers. So there are actually more tigers in the state of Texas than there are in the wild. And that's just one state, one of the worst states. So what we do, we are called in. Usually it's a confiscation where the USDA has found a facility that's really bad. It could be US Fish and Wildlife, might even be a local sheriff. And they've gone through the legal procedures in order to remove the animals legally. And it's usually because they're not being taken care of. They're being abused, neglected. It could be just outright being illegal, depending on where the people are located. And when they do, they need to find a home for those animals. So very often we are asked, and if we can take the animals, we'll be there, bring them to our facility. And as you can imagine, animals that are coming from such situations are in pretty bad shape, usually physically because they're malnourished. But a lot of them, people declaw them, especially the cats and the bears will get declawed, so they have trouble walking. They also have a lot of kind of psychological problems because usually they're in a very small cage. They've experienced a lot of stress in their lives, so they're used to pacing, a lot of self-mutilation, biting bars and things like that. But also, too, socially, most of them don't even know what they are. Most of these animals are removed from their mother at birth, so they can get used to being handled by people. And so they might grow up, a tiger might grow up never having seen another tiger since it was born. So that's a part of the rehabilitation process. And then eventually they end up in large habitats. So one of the things that makes the Wild Animal Sanctuary unique is that our animals live in large habitats with dirt and grass under their feet. We measure our habitats by acreage as opposed to square feet. There aren't any other places that really do it to the extent that we do. So our sanctuary, where I'm located outside of Denver, Colorado, we have 789 acres here, and we have more than 500 bears, lions, tigers, wolves, jaguars, leopards, servals, lynxes, bobcats, coyotes. So we have all kinds of animals, mostly animals with sharp claws and sharp teeth. And I said mountain lion. You folks probably call them cougars back there would be my guess. That same animal has, many different names. Puma. Out here we call them mountain lions, but in much of the country they're called cougars as well. So that's who we're talking about. And that's actually whose picture is behind this slide. That's one of our mountain lions right there. But almost 3 years ago now, a little bit more than 2.5 years ago, our property here, the 789 acres, is completely built out. So every bit of it has habitats on it. Not all the habitats are full, so we can still bring animals in, but we had no more room to expand. And we didn't want to have to quit rescuing animals because we ran out of room. So we went through a long search process, and in the middle of 2018, we purchased, or we acquired, we're still paying it off just like a mortgage, our refuge. We call it our refuge, the Wild Animal Refuge. And it's in southeastern Colorado. I'll show you a map of it after this. And it's almost 10,000 acres. So it's almost 15 square miles. It's 12 and a half times the size of us. So it's huge. So it's located, if you've been out here in Colorado, way down here in the southeast. Can you see my pointer when I go over the slide there or not? Okay, good. So we're located, there's Denver. That lion is up at Keensburg, where we're located, where I'm at the sanctuary. But our refuge is way down here in southeastern Colorado. Very, very rural. It's about 30 to 35 miles of dirt road just to get to us at the very end. So I'll show you what it looks like with a topography map. So there's the outline of our property. It's a former cattle ranch. The rancher was looking to sell the land and sold it to us. So it's 5 miles north to south, 3 miles east to west. So just under 15 square miles. And in the next map, I'll show you kind of over the last 2.5 years, we've been building habitats, huge habitats down there to have animals down there. And this is kind of the layout. So you can see with the black outline, that's the same map I just showed you. And this yellow area, that shows all the different habitats that we've currently built. And the next map will zoom in even more, and you'll see how big they are. There is a little bit of state land that's owned by the state of Colorado, and another little federal land, probably the Bureau of Land Management that owns it, and we just lease it. The lease basically goes with the property. Out here in the West, and I'm sure out there where you folks are too, much of the land is owned by the states or the federal government, and they just lease it out to the homeowners or property owners around there. So, going to our next slide, here's a zoom in on the types of habitats that we have there. And I'll show you some pictures of what they look like. So that you can see right there in the middle, that 243 acre habitat, that's one habitat that black bears can live in. Then right below it is 103 acres where our grizzlies are. And these habitats up here, the yellow one has lots of wolves in it. The red ones are where our big cats are. So right here, I'll show you a tiger in a second. That's a 35 acre habitat. So even as you're looking at it, you might think those little green things are like shrubs or something. They're actually trees. It's completely covered with a juniper forest. So this 35 acre has tiger habitats in it, or tigers in it, excuse me. This big one here, we just completed this summer, and it has a pride of lions living in it right now. We just moved 6 or 7 lions down there. So I'll show you what it looks like when you put animals in it. So this is one of our tigers. He's in that 35 acre habitat. His name is Boudiche. He's in there with his brother Bailey. And you can see he's laying underneath some juniper forest trees. The next picture, grizzly bear. Her name is Miss Montana. She has a sister named Miss America. They're part of a number of bears we got from the Wildlife Way Station outside of LA about 1.5 years ago. They ended up closing their doors in the middle of 2019. And we took a lot of animals from them, a lot of bears, got some hyenas from them, and we just got 12 wolves from them this year as well. So there's Miss Montana. She's checking out her 103 acre habitat. This female grizzly, she's in that same habitat. And it's big enough where we can put multiple grizzlies in there and they can live almost like free animals. And you can see this, her name is Pooh, like Winnie the Pooh. And you can see she's actually really striding there. You can see her front left leg stretched out, her back right leg stretched out. So she's actually just out moving like these animals need to do. So often bears get trapped in small cages and they just end up pacing back and forth their whole life because bears are made to move. They spend their whole lives foraging, looking for food. And so their body is designed by Mother Nature to cover tens of miles a day. And of course, they feel like they need to do that. And if they're in a small area, it looks like pacing. Well, it is pacing. Like I said, we have lots of wolves down there. Here's a couple of wolves. This picture was taken this summer. You can see it's a little bit warmer, so they're panting just like our pets at home. But they're enjoying the shade underneath some juniper trees there. So that's our refuge. But earlier in 2020, back in May, we actually took over another sanctuary down in Texas. It's a self-sufficient little sanctuary. It's pretty good. They've been in operation between 25 and 30 years, I think about 26 years. But the main person that was running the place, making it work, providing some financial support and everything, he just kind of aged out. He was in his early 80s. He also got a cancer diagnosis, and he just realized he couldn't run this place. It used to be called the International Exotic Animal Sanctuary. We renamed it and put it under our umbrella as the Wild Animal Refuge Texas. And what he did is he knew that he couldn't run this facility anymore, is he didn't want to close it down, because that would be like a double whammy. You'd be getting rid of a place that can take animals, and at the same time, you're needing a home for the animals that you currently have. So he did his due diligence, looked at sanctuaries all around the country, and he approached us and asked if we would just take it over. And so we did. And like I said, it's mostly self-sustaining. We've been able to help it some, just because by renaming it, it gives a little bit more national exposure. We've kind of streamlined some of their processes that we've perfected over 41 years. So they're doing good down there. It's in Boyd, Texas. If you're familiar with Texas, it's a small town northwest of Fort Worth. So I'm going to introduce you to a video coming up. So we have a video coming up, but I want to give you some background just so you know a little bit about it. And I know I'm giving you lots of information. I always tell people when I give tours, because I give a lot of our tours, if you ask me what time it is, I'm going to tell you how to build a clock. So that's just kind of how I am. So back in 2009, the country of Bolivia, way down in South America, passed a law making it illegal, banning circus animals. Circuses could no longer have animals in them. Well, obviously, they have to give time for the people to find a new home for them or to get them out of the circus. So they had about a year's time to come into compliance with the law. And at the end of the year, any animals in circuses were confiscated. And they ended up with about 25, excuse me, not about, but 25 African lions, and began to look for a home for them. These 25 lions came from 8 different circuses. So some of them were family groups of 6 or 7 lions, a full pride of lions. And they obviously didn't want to break up the family groups if they could, but that's what it was starting to look like. But then they asked us, and we said, no, we'll take all 25 lions, and that way that the family groups don't have to be broken up. So in early 2011, so exactly 10 years ago is February of 2011, 25 African lions got flown into Denver, Colorado on a big cargo plane, got transferred to our equipment, and we brought them out to the sanctuary, where most of them still live. So the video that we're about ready to see was done by a local news station. So as you watch this video, and hopefully you'll hear the sound, keep an eye out for 2 things. One is start to recognize the habitats. You'll see animals in bigger areas with dirt and grass under their feet with room to move around, but also notice how it is that people are viewing the animals. Jane knows very, very well how you view the animals. You can see it behind me. There's a picture of our elevated walkway behind me. But as you watch this video, just kind of look for some of those things.
It's the beauty of the tiger, isn't she? She's a big one. Oh, I'm here at the Wild Animal Sanctuary.
Can you hear it?
Just outside of Denver, Colorado. And I'm only a few miles outside of the city, but I'm on safari for lions and tigers.
We can hear it. It could be just a little louder.
Leave.
Okay, let me bump it up a little bit, and then I'll have to restart it. Hopefully this will help. Let me see what settings I have
So
here.
I can see everything up here on this Mile into the Wild walkway. What a walkway. I've seen grizzlies, leopards, wolves. I've seen more animals in 10 minutes than I've seen in my whole life. Now let's go check out the Bolivian lion house. This lion biosphere was built to care for 25 lions rescued from a Bolivian circus. Here the lions acclimate to their new Colorado home. Hi, Becca.
Hi.
So you're the head animal caretaker here, is that right?
Correct.
Caregiver.
Yes.
And what does that mean?
It means that we take care of the animals from everything from cleaning, feeding, medical needs, anything that they need, we take care of.
So you're pretty familiar with all the animals here, I'm guessing.
Yes.
And so for an untrained eye, it looks like these guys are napping.
Yes.
Is that a technical term for what they're doing?
If they were in the wild, they'd more likely be reserving energy for hunts later in the evening. But these guys here, you know, food's delivered to them. So this is just them enjoying being a lion.
What do you guys feed them?
Predominantly, we have two sources of food. One is a block that we actually purchased that is made specifically for big cats that has certain nutrients and things like that. And then another is a block that we actually make here ourselves that we add vitamins to that comes from organizations like Walmart and stuff like that that allows us to make our own block.
I mean, when we came up, these guys were all laying all over each other and cuddling. Are these guys a little family, or did they know each other before they got here?
These guys actually are a family. The coolest thing about the Bolivian rescues is when they came from the circuses, a lot of them, you know, were bred from within two parents in that circus. So when they got here, they were still in family units, like they would be in the wild. These guys were already that unit, and it's really cool to see that because we don't have it.
This really is a little family.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable what you guys are doing here.
Well,
Thanks
thank you.
for doing that.
Thank you.
So we had to build that lion house because they were arriving in February. And it's very cold here in February, just like it is in Vermont, I'm sure. And these animals were coming from South America where it was summertime. So the way I put it is they just had their little windbreakers on and not their heavy winter parkas. So when they first got here, that lion house, we heated up. We have a 1 million BTU gas heater that would keep it, you know, at a warmer temperature. And you may look at that and say, well, that's not a very large place. But you saw those kind of openings that those lions were laying in front of or in. Those open up to 10 to 20 acre habitats. And so as the winter months turned into spring, it starts to warm up. The animals started to get thicker fur coats because Mother Nature adapts very quickly to the cooler temperatures. Then those animals began to get moved out into habitats where they are now. Before I go on, I always like to point out on this slide, most of us know having a tiger as a so-called pet is not a good idea. There's lots of reasons. And one of them, the reasons, is right down here. If you look at the bottom of that slide, those teeth are 1.5 inches long, those canine teeth. Just imagine something like that trying to bite you. Well, we know what tigers can do. They're one of the best hunters in the world. So anyway, it doesn't make sense. So the problem, how did we get this huge problem of captive wildlife? Where'd it come from? So we'll take a look at it here. And I'm going to go ahead and click through a few slides here just to load it up. It makes it easier for me to talk about. And it also blends into how we got started. So our executive director and our founder, Pat's still our executive director, but he's the one who started this 41 years ago as a 19-year-old college student. And what had happened was he got to visit a zoo in North Carolina, and he got a behind-the-scenes tour. So this is somewhere around late 78, somewhere early 79. No offense to any of us here, but most of us can remember that. There's a young man that obviously he can't, but most of us remember 78, 79 without much trouble. But he got a behind the scenes tour at this zoo, and he saw 6 or 7 tigers in small cages out of view of the public. And the zoo had 2 or 3 display tigers like you'd normally expect to see at a zoo. So he asked the question, what are these animals doing back here? Do they ever get to go out into a bigger area? And he was told, well, they're extra animals. They were born here. And the underlying thing that wasn't said was having babies in the nursery of a zoo attract people and people bring money. So those tigers were born there. And he was told, no, there's really no way to get them out in front. It's difficult to move the animals. They're extra animals. And so Pat asked the question, well, what's going to happen to them? just kind of a logical sequence of questions if you saw something like that. And he was told, well, we try to find homes at other zoos, but most zoos have the same problem, so they'll probably be euthanized. So anyway, Pat came back here to Colorado, went to the Denver Zoo, which is a big reputable zoo, and he saw pretty much the exact same thing. They said, oh yeah, we have 5 or 6 tigers in the back. We have 2 or 3 display animals. So we asked the question, is it maybe an idealistic 19-year-old would, is there any kind of rescue organization or sanctuary for these animals? And he was told no. Most of us know in the late 70s, we were hardly out of the era of dog pounds. We knew what a dog pound was, but the whole idea of shelters, rescues, refuges, sanctuaries really hadn't developed yet here in the United States. So he was told no. And then he said, well, what would it take to rescue animals like this? And they said, well, you'd have to become a zoo. That was the only category at the time, was to become a zoo. And initially, Pat said, well, I'm only 19 years old. I can't become a zoo. But his parents have a 15-acre farm, or they did, right outside of Boulder. And so he just couldn't live. He never planned on doing this. He was in his first year of college, just taking general studies classes, maybe some finance, because he wanted to take over his parents' tire shops that they had. But instead, he ended up rescuing animals. So he did get licensed as a zoological facility, built the cages. And at that time, the only criteria for animals like this was concrete and steel cages. So he had to build those, and he started rescuing them. So anyway, let's get back to this whole backstory. That just gives you a little bit of history about us. So zoos had this huge surplus of animals because, as I mentioned before, babies in the nursery attract people and people bring money. Plus, there was always this view that if you have a lot of animals, you're breeding animals, that's a sign of success, so people might be more inclined to support you. But there was no room for those animals. However, at the time, in most states, there were no laws against having exotic animals. And that's because you don't normally have a law for a problem you don't have. Well, the zoos realized this, and they began to sell their animals out to the public, to anyone who wanted to buy them. And most states didn't have any laws against that. So we had this huge influx of these excess zoo animals that ended up out everywhere in the country. And that, of course, brought about breeding and selling of these animals because people realized there's a lot of money in exotic animals. And ever since then, we've been fighting this battle state by state. And I'll show you a map in a couple minutes here that kind of gives you an overview of the different states and the levels of laws they have about exotics. But we found that educating people about the problem and to not support places that have these kinds of animals helps a lot. So education is the key. And I made this slide before COVID, but just like a virus, it's an international problem now as well. So in this next video, it's another video. It's a little bit more about the Bolivia lion rescue itself. An hour-long documentary was made about that rescue from Bolivia. And this is a short little vignette that talks about the sanctuary and that rescue. I just want to give you a little bit of a warning. There are a couple of quick scenes where some animals aren't being treated well. But there's a lot of drama here. It shows you kind of the work we're involved with and how bad it can be at times. So go ahead and watch it. It tends to come on pretty loud, so you might have to adjust your volume. But we'll go ahead and give it a shot. At the very beginning, you're going to see Pat. He's our executive director. He's the middle-aged man that you'll see, but you'll also see a young man. That's his oldest son, Casey, who's been involved with the sanctuary since he was born.
Hello, this is Pat. So what's the news on the big tigers? Okay. So we're looking at about 2.5 weeks from now being able to be coming up there and getting them. You bet.
The exotic animal trade brings in over $6 billion annually. For many of these animals, their lives are spent confined, neglected, and mistreated. Enter Pat Craig and his team of wild animal crusaders, ready to break down any barrier that stands between them and exotic animals in need.
We go into all these places on rescue, which is our primary interaction with these animals when we're first getting them.
And the work they do puts them in the world's most dangerous places, dealing with violent people and deadly animals.
You go halfway up in the mountains and somebody's got them in their crawl space, that's weird.
But for this one-of-a-kind team, no challenge is too great and no location unreachable.
These guys have been through a lot, so I feel happy that they're going to be here.
Every time we rescue new animals, we move on to another set. We retain that set here at the sanctuary.
These lucky wild animals will live out the rest of their lives on one of the world's most unique wildlife sanctuaries.
You have the attitude that when it hits 5, it's time to go home, then you're not going to work here. I don't care. And if you have to miss your sister's wedding, then you have to miss your sister's wedding.
There's never an end of, okay, now it's all done and we don't have any more work involved.
Today was a little over 6,300 pounds of meat.
Which is great. Not so great.
We have our family moments, both good and bad.
That was an accident, I'm sorry.
Oh, you haven't thrown it that far before.
That's a great boss as far as bosses go, but he's also my father.
Don't give me that. And you lock me up in a cage for the rest of my life, and you can make your choices.
Okay, well, I'll let you out in a couple of weeks.
I say, well, go put it in the truck, and that was it. Let's go a little easier.
There's not a chance in hell that I'll get tomorrow off.
The key is not only is it hard physical work and it's hot and you get tired and it's long hours, you know, you do 12, 14 hours a day, that you get to the point where you're like, is this all worth it? We gotta get going. We only have a couple hours left. Yeah, I'm starting to feel the nervousness of this whole thing, just to make sure that it all goes well.
Hopefully we can get clear out before the machines.
Yeah, I'm kind of worried. I don't know if she'll make it long enough before we get down there.
So here's a map. This was of current animals, the states that we've rescued animals from. It doesn't include all the animals from 41 years. This is as of a year ago when I made this slide, the animals we currently had and where they came from. So you can see all over the country. The interesting thing is, especially since I'm talking to people in Vermont, is New England, we've never gotten animals from there. Not quite sure why. Part of it, I think, is most of the states in New England, as far as I can tell, enacted pretty strict exotic laws a long time ago. Here in Colorado, and I'll show you that map as I mentioned, Pat lobbied our legislature back in the 1980s, telling them if we don't lock down people having exotic animals, we're going to have a big problem. So anyway, you can see some states really have a lot of animals, but we also rescue internationally. We're the only carnivore sanctuary in the country that does so. So here's a map of some of our international rescues. A lot of animals from Mexico, Canada, Spain. 5 years ago, we got 12 lions, 4 grizzlies from a drive-through wildlife park in Spain. Even Lebanon over in the Middle East. And I haven't updated this yet, but about a week and a half ago, we actually got a wallaby, of all things. We don't know why they sent it to us, from Lebanon as well. So anyway, next to that little red fox from Lebanon, we could put a little wallaby. Argentina, we've been working with some zoos down there as they shut them down because they have such poor conditions. Uruguay, Bolivia, you can see the 25 lions. Saipan, many of you may not know this, it's a small territory of the United States out in the Pacific Ocean by Guam. And then even 2.5, 3 years ago, we got 3 African lions from a zoo in South Korea. So we're out there. As I said, we're the only carnivore sanctuary in the country that'll rescue international animals. So here's this map I've been talking about. It gives you an idea of the types of laws that the different states have. So obviously, we know 50 states, 50 sets of laws. So if you look at Colorado, right out here, big blue state, the dark blue states, we pretty much prohibit all exotic animals. And you can see that Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, New York have done the same things. So they just make it across the board illegal to have exotic animals. But then you have states that are kind of this, like Maine, these kind of crosshatch states. They just limit some of the animals. And usually what they prohibit are the big three: the great cats, bears, and the great apes, like chimpanzees or gorillas. But they allow other exotic animals. But then you have the states that are light colored, like Texas, Oklahoma. They don't prohibit it. They just make you buy a permit for it. So that's how we know there's about 4,000 tigers in Texas, is because there's that many tiger permits out in Texas. But then you have the states in red, and those are states that have no laws at all against exotics. This map is a few years old, and they haven't updated it, so I did a little bit of updating myself. If you look down here, South Carolina used to not have any prohibition at all. But in 2017, they became one of those kind of striped colored states because they now ban large carnivores. But North Carolina, Alabama, Wisconsin, and Nevada have no laws against exotics. So if you lived in an unincorporated area, because most cities would probably have a law, but if you lived in an unincorporated area, there's no law in those states that says you can't just go get a tiger. And where would you get a tiger? First of all, you can Google it. You can search on the internet. But there's still exotic wildlife auctions here in the United States. And there's websites dedicated to selling exotic animals. So it's not as hard as we would like. So now let's move on here. So I want to talk a little bit more about rescues. As I mentioned at the beginning, when we rescue animals, most of the time they're being confiscated, about 80 to 85% of the time. The other times is when they're voluntarily surrendered. So we might get a case where someone, for example, just a little over a year ago, had a fox that they considered a pet down in Texas. And it's legal to have a fox as a pet in Texas, but they moved to Colorado. They got a hold of our Division of Wildlife and said, I'd like to register my fox. And they were told, well, actually, you're in violation of Colorado law. So they can't have a fox here in Colorado. And so he asked us to take this fox. And we've had a number of cases like that. We have one case where, and he was actually in that first video, they showed a very quick picture of a lion laying out in the grass. Some people in Ohio got him from an exotic wildlife auction when he was a small cub. They paid all of $425 for him. You can't even buy a registered dog for that. And they called us when he was about 3 years old and said, this lion keeps outgrowing everything I put it in, as if that's a surprise. So anyway, we went and got him. When we went to get him, he was in a tool shed. So of course, now he lives on many acres. But rescues are typically confiscations or a place where people are being illegal or breaking the law or not taking care of the animals. So what I have here now is another video. And it talks about a rescue we did in October of 2016. This video actually won a local Emmy Award. It's narrated by a director of animal care, and she's the woman that was in the first video. That's Becca Maselli. Becca's been out here about 23 years. She started volunteering right out of high school, and she's a vet tech by training. She probably knows more about large carnivore husbandry than just about anyone in the country, if not world, because there's no other place in the world where you would be working with hundreds of large carnivores on a daily basis for 23 years. So Becca's going to be narrating this, kind of from the animal's point of view. It's a little bit touching, so some of you might need some Kleenex there. You'll also see her. She's going to be inside a transfer cage with a tranquilized black bear. And she's kind of holding up, I think, an IV bag or something like that. So we'll go ahead and watch that. And this is a situation where someone could never say no. We've all heard about hoarding situations where someone that has a big heart takes in some cats because they don't want those cats living out there, but then they don't get them neutered or spayed, so you have more cats. They keep rescuing them, and eventually you have a situation where they can't take care of them anymore. They can't take care of the food, they can't give them a clean enough space, they can't give them enough room, and so you end up with dozens and dozens of animals that started out maybe for the right motivation, but it just got out of control. And that's what happened to this place that we're going to be going to here. It's up in Spearfish, South Dakota. So it's out by Mount Rushmore, if any of you have been out there. And the person started out rescuing animals, but they never said no. They started rescuing exotics, and they started rescuing domestic animals like dogs and cats and waterfowl and things. And eventually they just couldn't take care of it. But also, sadly, the owner, I think, started to have some mental problems. He eventually fired all of the volunteers, quit accepting food, and so the USDA stepped in. Initially, we were asked to take 3 animals. By the time we left, we took 24. So just kind of enjoy this. A little bit of a sad tone because it shows the bad situation they're coming from, but it ends on an upbeat because they end up here. Oh, and by the way, that big grizzly, it's the same one, Kodiak grizzly, that's behind me. His name is Jake. He's about, as a Kodiak grizzly, his head's as big around as my arms, no exaggeration. He weighs about 1,600 or 1,700 pounds. So he's just a massive animal. He's our largest animal out here.
I think sometimes it's easy to forget just how scary that moment is when we come into these animals' lives. I mean, no matter how rough their living conditions, it's all they've ever known. It's their home. They don't know what's on the other side of that fence. Sometimes they're excited to go with us, to get out of there. Other times it's like leaving everything they know behind. But to see where they're going, to experience that joy the first moment they step into the habitat, to see the emotional and physical damage just melt away. I really think that's why a lot of people come to the sanctuary, why they adopt one of these creatures, why they care so incredibly much. It's not just because they want to help. I think it's because it changes us inside too. We see ourselves in these animals. We know what it's like to go through hard times, to experience incredible, terrifying transitions. I mean, we've all been there. When people experience these animals, it's powerful, not just because of how beautiful and how majestic they are, but because of where they came from. Just like us, their present was written through the stories of their past. It's incredibly impactful. It's beautiful and it changes you immensely. I've been working with these animals for years, and I feel incredibly honored to be part of their journey, to help them make that transition into a beautiful life, to give them a voice because they've never had one of their own.
So how do people get involved with our work? And we are a 501c3 nonprofit. We incorporated in 1999. So from 1980 to 99, it was just family run. Pat was working 2 or 3 jobs. He and his family and whoever he could get helped him with it as it grew. And then in 99, we incorporated. So he became our executive director. We have a board of directors, 501c3. So different ways people can be engaged. Most of you won't be able to visit. But some people like Jane did. So we're open 7 days a week, 9 a.m. to sunset. We only close 4 days a year, Christmas, New Year's, Thanksgiving, and Independence Day. So coming to visit is one way you can be involved with us. Another way, this is probably even less likely, but we rely on it, is to volunteer. Most of us that work here were volunteers before. I volunteered for about 5 years before I began working here about 7 years ago. We need a lot of work. We have about 130 to 140 volunteers. In the summer, when we're feeding our 200 plus bears, because we have over 200 bears here, plus all the carnivores, we're feeding 70 to 80,000 pounds of food a week. It's about half that now just because the bears are asleep, they're hibernating, but we need volunteers to help us prepare all those diets, to feed the animals, to clean out water tanks, to clean enclosures and the like. So volunteering is a big way. And of course, people can always donate. That's an option with 501c3 nonprofits. So with that, we'll just end up here. We'll open it up for questions, but I also want to point you towards our website, wildanimalsanctuary.org. All of you folks are proficient at computers, so you can go to our website. Lots of videos, lots of information about us and how we exist. Also, too, we have a Facebook page. Many of you may not have your own Facebook page, but because we're public, it's opened up to anyone who wants to look at it. So even if you don't have a Facebook page, you can go to facebook.com, type in the Wild Animal Sanctuary, and hopefully find us. We typically post a number of pictures and stories throughout the week, and it's a good way to keep up with us. So with that, I think I'm going to stop the sharing, and then we'll just go back to see if there's any questions. Does that sound okay, Jane?
Sounds good.
All righty. Let me close this out, and we'll see if there are any questions.
Do you neuter any of the animals?
Yes, we neuter them all. So we don't allow our animals to reproduce, partly because then we would be adding to the problem of captive-born wildlife. Plus, we would be using up resources that could be used for true animals in need. So we accomplish no reproduction by, and we neuter all of the male animals except for African lions. If you neuter a male lion, he's going to lose his mane. It's based on testosterone levels. And the mane really plays a role in pride dynamics, plays a role in the psychology of the lion himself. So our female lions, rather than neutering the males, are actually on a contraceptive implant. It's similar to Norplant in humans. It suppresses the estrus cycle. The females aren't cycling in and out of heat, and therefore the males aren't fighting over them. So it really works a couple of ways because it gives us the added advantage of allowing unrelated male lions to be in the same pride. You would never see that in the wild. Usually it's brothers that would have a pride. But because they're not fighting over mating rights, they can get along together. So yes, we occasionally we rescue a pregnant animal and then we end up with a baby that way, but typically we don't have babies out here.
I wonder how many veterinarians they have.
Do you ever feed any live animals? I'm thinking of a chase, with lions and tigers.
We don't. Keep in mind, these guys were all born in captivity, taken away from their mother at birth. So really, most of them, on a basic level, never learned how to hunt. They've never been fed wild animals. They don't. If you come out here, you'll see cottontail rabbits in the lion habitats. So they don't associate furry four-legged things with food. It sounds kind of humorous at first, but in a way, it's sad that these apex predators don't even hunt. So we never use live food like that. Also, too, if they were able to do it, they risk injury. I mean, worst case, you think of a lion trying to kill a zebra, gets kicked in the jaw, and then that lion's going to have a broken jaw and die from starvation. So we provide all the food in a frozen meat block kind of format, if you will, different size meat blocks depending on the size of the animal. For the carnivores, the bears are like people. They forage, eat, graze all the time. So with our bears, we just keep a smorgasbord of food out in front of them all the time. And that way they can eat what they want when they want.
When I was there, Kent, I actually saw a lion eat a prairie dog.
Oh, good for that lion.
Yeah, he caught it.
No, that's good. So there are some, the general rule is they don't, but there are some. Sometimes the younger animals will get them, but people dumped prairie dogs out here. We never used to have them, but there's a lot of prairie dog rescue organizations that try to, save prairie dogs from maybe a subdivision development. And over the years, we've had a lot of prairie dogs dumped out here. So we're actually kind of overrun by them. So I'm really proud for that lion, to tell you the truth.
Good. Someone wrote in the chat. They wrote a question: do you have private and or foundation support?
open mic chat as well. So yeah, so most of our support comes from just individuals like you or I, people that support us. You know, some people adopt an animal each month. Small animals are $10 a month. Medium size, like mountain lions, wolves, jaguars, are $20 a month. The big animals, bears, lions, tigers, are $30 a month. So some people do that. Some people, you know, December 31st rolls around, they write a check for a certain amount because of the tax donation, whatever. So most of the support we get comes from individuals. There are family foundations, you know, where maybe someone in the family set aside a trust fund and they have bylaws that say they want to support an animal organization. So sometimes we get money from folks like that. Some people leave us in their estate, just like you would with any kind of nonprofit organization. You set up some kind of way to help support them financially. Yeah, so animals without claws. Sadly, that's a great question. We get a lot of animals that have been declawed, and they even have their fangs filed down. And that's a horrible attempt for people to try to make the animals safer. Because as they start to grow, and they're wild animals, they don't domesticate, you know, they start to bite and claw, and it hurts. So a lot of people resort to declawing and filing down the fangs. When you declaw an animal, it's the same as an amputation to our first knuckle. That's what's going on. Because you got to get behind their nail bed, which is the same as our, or their claw bed, which is the same as our nail bed. So it's an amputation. This is a bit cringe, but we've had a number of people tell us, I just use bolt cutters. So it wasn't even surgically done necessarily by a veterinarian. But it really changes because big cats put 60% of their weight on their front legs. And it's the same, if you just try to walk I dare anyone, stand up, pick up your toes and try to walk. You're going to walk completely different than you normally would. So it really affects. We end up with a lot of animals on basically aspirin. It's just, they get a lot of osteoarthritis, musculoskeletal issues, just like we do as we age. But a lot of it's compounded because they have been declawed. And so what happens is you remove those front claws where the animals would normally put some weight.
What's that?
Don't have those, or there's nerve damage. So they end up shifting their weight back to the back of their foot. Puts a lot of stress on the ankle down here, which then gets transferred up through the elbow and into the shoulder. And so all of those joints are not working like they normally would because a good part of the system has been taken away with a declaw. And so they end up with, like I said, arthritis is a big problem of ours as the animals get older. Some of them have permanent limps because of bad declaws and everything. And we often have to go in and clean them up because what will happen is they'll do kind of a butcher job and they won't get the whole nail bed, but they get a lot of it. And then the nail just keeps growing or the claw keeps growing, but there's no bone foundation underneath it. And so then it just goes, what usually happens is the claw starts to grow up through the top of their foot. And then we have to go in and just, clean up that whole joint to at least clean it up so the nail doesn't try to grow back. So yeah. Okay, go ahead, and then I'll answer Lucille's chat question.
I was going to ask if you couldn't release any of these animals into the wild because of their behavioral problems, being born in captivity, or is it a combination with their physical status with, not having claws or fangs, to protect themselves or feed?
So it's all of the above. So first of all, they never learn survival skills because they're not raised with their mother. If you think of a bear, black bear, grizzly cub spends 2 to 3 years with mom. We've all watched nature shows where the cheetah or the lion is trying to teach their cubs how to hunt. So they've never learned survival skills. They've also always been fed by human beings. I don't know how much of a problem Vermont has with bears, but here in Colorado, people try to feed bears. They don't take up their bird feeders. They leave their trash out or whatever. And the bears get into trouble because they found a source of food and they just keep coming back. And here in Colorado, they'll try to relocate them, take them 75, 100 miles away, and the bear works its way back. So once these animals have been conditioned to receive food by humans, they never forget it. So if you could take a mountain lion and somehow train it to learn to live in the wild, someone might be hiking up in the country and this mountain lion says, oh, a human beings feed me. I remember that. And you can just imagine if the mountain lion walked up to the person, it's not going to go well. The other thing to keep in mind is, first of all, most of these animals, like tigers, the main reason they're having such a tough time in the wild is because they have no habitat left. As people have grown, we push wild animals out of their natural habitat. So the animals that are already in the wild are usually feeling pretty crushed in. They're feeling a lot of pressure from humans. So really in the wild, there's no room to release these animals. So that's another reason. Plus, going back to Ray's question about breeding, these animals have all been bred indiscriminately throughout the decades that it's been going on. And so most of our animals, like the tigers, are considered generic or mutt tigers. There's 6 subspecies of tigers left in the world, and our tigers could be any combination of those. People basically just cross stripe with stripes to get stripes. So you would be introducing a genetically inferior animal into the environment if you were to do that. So for lots of reasons, once they're born in captivity, their fate is sealed. And we just try to give them the best home possible, given their circumstances. So Lucille, our animals typically do live longer in captivity. Living in the wild is tough. We always see kind of sometimes the idealized side of living in the wild, but it's hard to hunt. It's hard to get enough nourishment. You risk being injured. You're in fights with other animals. So most of our animals, what we figure is they live about 50% longer than they would in the wild. So the big cats, tigers, lions, could live up to about 20 to 23. Very often it's kind of that 18 to 21 years. The mountain lions, jaguars, leopards, they kind of live in that 16 to 19 year range very often. Not always, because some of them come from such a bad situation it eventually catches up with them, but kind of like an old house cat. Wolves are kind of that 10 to 13 year range, like a big dog, might live or something like that. So in general, they do live longer. Bears are our longest lived animals. Bears will live 30 to 40 years in captivity.
Ken, when they come to you, you said they have psychological problems. Are there certain things you do to help them with those problems?
So just like with people, psychological problems are usually solved by just time and being in a healthy environment. So usually they're self-correcting. It kind of goes along with Lucille's question. Psychologically, just getting them in a healthy environment with others of their own kind, a lot of those things start to dissipate. A lot of them will go away if we just properly socialize them. So like with a lion, if you get a lion that hasn't been around other lions, a lot of the psychological aspects will be related to a social animal like lions are living in isolation. So simply getting them in that lion house, we saw the video of it in the first one, next to other lions where they hear other lions roaring. They learn, a lot of our lions show up and they don't even know how to roar because they've never been around another lion before. So they haven't had that stimulation. So getting them around other animals where they can hear them, see them, smell them, interact with them, and initially not physically, but at least through sight and vocalizations, that helps a lot. But the biggest thing with the psychological aspect, like I said, is a healthy environment over time, just like with people. So pacing, especially in bears, is really bad. A lot of us, no offense, are old enough to remember CRT computer screens. Those are the ones that had the bright green light on kind of a black background. And they always told you got to turn your monitor off because it's going to burn an image in the monitor if you don't. Obviously, new computers doesn't do that. But with the CRTs, it did burn an image. And sometimes even old TV sets would do that. And that's how I liken it with, especially a bear's brain. For some reason, if they've been pacing back and forth, sometimes for years at a time, that behavior is just burned into their brain. And it can take months to years sometimes for a bear to completely leave that behavior behind. What happens is they start to do it less and less, but if they experience some kind of stress, it might trigger it for a while. And then it goes down again and eventually pretty much disappears because they're given enough space and a healthy environment. And the stresses that cause that pacing are removed. So, but it can take a long time. Bears are by far the worst at it, usually because they're the ones who do it the most before they get here. Because as I mentioned before, bears travel miles a day, and they're going to get that mileage in somehow, whether it's in a 20-foot cage or over acres and acres like we give them. And we do not have any human interaction other than the keepers with the animals. It's no benefit to the animals unless they ask for it. Sometimes we get a newer animal and they're in a smaller enclosure, an introduction area, and they might come up and kind of rub against the fence a little bit, but we never force ourselves onto the animals. If they kind of chuff a little bit like tigers do, or they come up and rub, the keepers will, we're not sticking fingers or hands in, but the keepers will pay a little bit of extra attention to them. But the longer the animals are here, the less and less they care about people, because now they're concerned about their own animals or their own habitat. But we don't, on a regular basis, interact with them. Obviously, we have to feed them, water them, and if they need veterinary care, interact with them that way. But we don't handle them or anything like that. That's what we're rescuing them from. All righty, it's looking like we might have dried up the questions, huh?
Where do bears hibernate?
Good question. So in all of our habitats, let me see if, I don't even know if I have, I'm trying to think of if I have a good picture on my computer to get rid that I can share with you. But we have these concrete bunkers that we bury under the ground. They're prefabricated, they're 6 feet tall, 6 feet wide, 12 feet long, and we bury them into the ground, and we have a big concrete pipe, just big sewer pipes basically, and they go back 30 to 40 feet to this concrete bunker. So we provide those underground dens for all of our animals. They work much better than trees for keeping animals cool in the summer. Plus they're good shelter in the winter if the animals want that. So they have these wonderful underground dens that stay about 60 degrees year round. So the animals are more likely to use them in the summer to get out of the heat than the winter to get out of the cold. But of course the bears hibernate 4 to 6 months a year, and those underground bunkers work great. All righty. Well, Jane, thanks for bringing me to Vermont today.
Well, thanks for coming, and thanks for bringing us to Colorado.
All righty. Well, hopefully you folks check out our website, wildanimalsanctuary.org. Lots of information, rescue stories, videos, pictures, our history, just all kinds of things. So,
thank you.
All right.